Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at today's webinar. We're really pleased you could make it. This webinar is aimed at schools, trusts and local authorities and will cover how our tools and reports can help you manage attendance. So first of all, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping points. So this webinar will be published on YouTube. It's being recorded. Once the recording is available, we'll send you a link to the email that you registered with. You're able to ask questions in the Q&A function anytime during the call. We welcome your questions. Any questions that we can't answer today, we'll try and get back to you privately, or we can also do a follow-up Q&A when we send out the follow-up email. And also just to say that we'll share a link at the to survey at the end of the call, and we'll welcome your feedback on how we can improve these sessions. I now run through what we'll be covering today. So here's a quick kind of overview of what we're covering at today's session. We're going to be beginning with the National Pupil Attendance Statistics. That'll give you an overview of the current attendance landscape. We'll then be moving on to transition data analysis, looking at how attendance drops between year 6 and year 7 and what we're doing to help tackle that problem. Next, we'll look at the new Similar Schools Comparison Report. It's a tool that allows you to benchmark your school's attendance against others with similar characteristics. And finally, we're going to wrap up with a forward look and key messages highlighting what we've got coming up and any actions for you from this session. So I think I'm now handing over to Tom Curd for the National Statistics.
Thank you. Just next slide, please. Brilliant. So the Pupil Attendance publication has 2 components. We've got the Explore Education Statistics page and an interactive attendance dashboard. Within the release, you can view attendance data on a daily, weekly or year-to-date basis. And you can also look at individual terms. Schools can use this to benchmark themselves against the national attendance figures, or you could look regionally or at local authorities of interest. The latest published stats cover the 2024 to 2025 academic year up to the 16th of May, and the next release will be coming out on Thursday, and that's going to cover the latest fortnight up to the 30th of May. So what do the latest year-to-date data show? So we can see that the absence rate was 6.7% across all schools, which is 0.3 percentage points lower compared to the equivalent point in the 23-24 academic year. And the rate of persistent absence, so that's pupils who missed 10% or more of their possible sessions, was 18%, and that's a 1.8 percentage point decrease compared to the equivalent point in the last academic year. This means that we have 140,000 fewer pupils persistently absent this year compared to last. We recently published a new statistic to hopefully communicate the improvements in attendance that we're seeing in a more digestible way. So you'll see on the right of the screen that the decrease in absence over the autumn and spring term equates to around 3.1 million more days in school this year compared to last. And we'll be publishing an update to this figure, including the summer term, at the end of the current academic year. So although all of the above are quite positive as they show that absence is improving, we're still a long way from pre-pandemic rates. And it's important to note that gains that have been made are still quite fragile, and success this year does depend on a strong end to the year. I'm now going to hand over to Alex Turner, who's going to cover some analysis on transitions data.
Thanks, Tom. Morning, my name's Alex Turner. I work in the School Attendance Policy Division. If you've come to one of our recent webinars or joined any of the recent conferences, you'll have heard us talk about the transition between year 6 to year 7 and through Key Stage 3 being a real key moment in a child's attendance journey as well as their wider education journey. We think it's a big opportunity for the work across the system to improve school attendance. In the chart on the right of this slide, you can see the proportion of children who attended almost every day, over 95% of the time, in each of the school years in the academic year 22-23. Those bold statistics, so starting at 51 down to 43, are all children. And in the square brackets, that's the rate of in everyday attendance in children eligible for free school meals. What you can see is that the proportion of children attending almost every day builds through primary and remains pretty high all the way up to year 6. As a benchmark, and this sort of links to what Tom's just said, these numbers are still lower than we saw pre-pandemic, when around 2/3 of children attended almost every day. But we can still see that year 3 to year 6 is where we see some of the strongest rates of in everyday attendance. What's really interesting is what happens after year 6, where we can see that drop off into year 7, again into year 8, again into year 9, and that it really doesn't recover. And looking again at those square bracketed numbers, we can see those drops are bigger for children eligible for free school meals, both absolutely and relatively. We think that shows something really interesting about how children move from one school to another. And you may have seen a blog by FFT more recently, which talked about this. That dived into when in the school year this trend seems to set in. And really interestingly, they found that some of the biggest drops in year 7 attendance was in the second half term, and again into the third half term. And then those rates continue to decline as other year groups did. And they also found that in areas of the country where children don't move schools between year 6 and year 7, so for example, where we have middle schools, we don't see such a big year 6 to year 7 drop off. We heard from the schools we engaged with in the recent conferences that one big advantage to supporting, or one big tool in supporting children through that transition from an attendance perspective, would be to see the data for incoming year 7 children in advance of transition, so that schools can look at that data and identify where support might be needed and where they might work more intensively with some families to support children through that transition period. And so building on some work done in Oldham and Greater Manchester, where they looked to provide that data to secondary schools in advance of transition, we very quickly have made a report available to secondary schools that provides for you a snapshot of your incoming cohorts attendance data to support a really strong transition. On the next slide, we detail what you can access in that report, and you can see what's captured in that report on the left-hand side. To access this report, if you haven't already, you simply need to log into your View Your Education Data platform, go into the Monitor Your School Attendance section and select Year 6 transition data, and you should have access to the available data for your incoming cohort. We've done this really quickly, and it's been done in the most efficient way we can, which is by looking at the offer data for your school. So on the next slide, I just want to spend a couple of minutes saying, we've heard from school leaders that this is a really big advancement in your support through that transition from year 6 to year 7. And you might have seen the recent work by Impact Ed on that transition that provides insight as to what might be going on beneath those numbers. But the list we've provided, we recognise, isn't a complete list for some schools for the reasons on this slide. The thing to note is that the data you have now is from the 10th of September to the 31st of March. It's based on the children offered a place in your school for year 7 at the point of National Offer Day. And it's based on the attendance and absence code recorded for each pupil in their current school's management information system. So as part of your usual transition engagement with feeder primary schools, secondary schools colleagues I know will be using this as a starting point for those discussions and supplementing any gaps in your data through that engagement. But we really do hope it can support you to support those children at risk of seeing those declines in absence we started with in this section of the webinar, and have a really strong start to the next academic year for your new year 7 cohorts. And I'm going to hand now to Sarah Milne at Three Spires Trust, who's going to talk about what they're already doing with that data to support schools to have a really strong transition into next academic year.
Good afternoon, my name's Sarah. I am Director of Safeguarding and SEND for Three Spires Trust. and I'm just going to share with you a little about what it is that we're doing with the transition data tool that's become available to us in recent weeks. Just to set the scene slightly, let me just share our context in numbers. We are a small multi-academy trust. We cover 3 local authority areas with 3 secondary settings, 4 primary settings. We serve children from 8 different local authority areas, and the secondary schools are welcoming children from 87 different primary settings this coming September, and in total they're welcoming around 500 children across the 3 settings. But of course we are one trust, and so this is about how we're pulling all of that information together to support all of those 500 children across those 3 schools. So what we did first, well, I stumbled across the Year 6 the Year 6 transition data tool, and downloaded it for one of the schools, started exploring what the data shared and showed me, and filtered it, and then thought we need to apply the absence banding. That's been really helpful for us with whole school attendance for the children in years 7 to 11, and likewise in our primary settings. So we needed to do the same with the data that had become available to us through this tool. Once I'd sorted that, I identified exactly how many children were persistently absent and severely absent from the cohorts, and shared all of that information with each secondary setting so they've got it to use. I asked the individual settings if they could identify what it told us, review what they currently do to support attendance and engagement of children transitioning from primary school to secondary school, and to consider what it might be telling them that they didn't previously know, so that they knew how to do things differently. We then started sharing ideas, initially by email. We pulled those ideas, and then we had a short 20-minute sharp meeting looking at information sharing about what we'd identified in different settings to be able to help one another. We spotted the differences, we spotted the similarities, but most importantly, we identified that all our schools do an extended transition setup. So maybe some of them do 3, 4, 5 days of transition, not just one day in isolation. And there's enhanced transition. When we looked at who that's for the children that the schools were previously identifying as vulnerable, maybe the children with an EHCP, some of the children on the SEND register, and some other children identified by primary settings. We discussed that maybe the purpose of enhanced transition meant that we should be bringing more children into the fold. So using the attendance data, because actually that purpose of the enhanced transition is about improving the sense of belonging in the new setting, improving connections, identification of key people, building their confidence, familiarisation, etc. And that's a pre-transition week piece of work, but also a post-transition piece of work. It seemed really important that children whose attendance was not as strong in year 6 ought also to be brought into the enhanced transition programme from this year. Wider activity has included us really recognising what we know the data already tells us. So we know that children who access free school meals in year 7 have a significant drop in attendance right from the start of the year. So one thing that we weren't previously doing was offering breakfast club during transition week, so that it became the norm for children when they came to school. The year 7 to 11 were already accessing it. The children were accessing it at primary school, but suddenly they were expected to arrive for the start of the school day. So breakfast club is on offer this year in all the secondary settings for transition week. Targeted and scheduled communications with some families, as well as opportunities for parents and carers as well. But during transition week, a real shared relational language. If the whole purpose of transition is about improving sense of belonging and understanding how things work in an organisation, then that shared relational language about welcome year 7. You're not apart from our school today. This is part of welcome. You're part of us. It doesn't start in September. It starts now. So every time members of staff from the schools are meeting with the children, they're already talking as though they're part of that school community. So they belong right from the start. One of our settings is going to be trialling beginning intervention support around emotionally based school anxiety during summer 2. So that they're starting that work. We're going to look at the impact of that so that all settings can consider it next year, and schools are targeting social, emotional and mental health support staff going out to transition visits. The Impact Head Mind the Engagement Gap report has been shared with all schools as well, because there's some helpful tips in there for us to consider. As part of the wider piece of work around attendance and school improvement, we've increased the amount of work we've done to target and support attendance with the senior leadership teams, and we've taken them on a walk through their own VIED reports so that they can truly get to the heart of what it says, not just see the report and explore it. We've also been doing that now with the Year 6 data set in isolation, but the numbers on their own aren't enough. We know that, and as a result, what we're ensuring is that through the development of the new tool that we've managed to download and work with from the DFE data set, we've reduced the workload in the settings, so thank you for that. I've been able to reduce that further by streamlining it and creating consistency for each of our schools, because ultimately we're one team and it provides CPD for everybody. And next on our agenda is to review it as we would for the children. So we did the assessment, we've identified which children need that enhanced support, we've planned it, we're doing it currently, and next academic year we'll be reviewing it. We'll further develop that then into 26 to 27. Is what we're doing perfect? No. Is it better than it was last year? Absolutely. And do we believe it'll be better in 26 to 27? Yeah, of course it will be. But hopefully some of the things that we've shared here are things that you'll be able to use in your school, in your trust, using the new data tool and supporting transition of children from Year 6 into Year 7 and beyond.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm James Lawrence. I head up the Strategic Data Science Projects team at DFE, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest release of attendance static reports that will be available on View Your Education Data. And I believe they're coming online almost as we speak, but certainly later today. Now, all through this academic year, we've been developing a series of static reports to help you form your attendance strategy and have well-informed conversations with governors, trustees, and other stakeholders on how to improve attendance. We've made a significant upgrade to these reports. Until recently, the reports compared your school's attendance and aspects of it to the national average. And this was useful, but it didn't take account of differences in individual schools' contexts, and it wasn't always very clear which areas schools should focus on that might lead to the biggest improvement. Now, May's release and today's release address these limitations by introducing a new similar schools report. You can access these in much the same way as the previous static reports. So if you're a mainstream primary or secondary school, log on to View Your Education Data and navigate to Monitor Your School Attendance. That's the same place that you'd find the transition report that Alex talks about. And then there'll be an item called Similar Schools Comparison Reports, where you can download your own personalised reports, which is specific to your school. As with the other static reports, these are designed so that you can share them with governors, you can share them with trustees and any other interested parties that you want to share them with. And for trusts and local authorities, there will be an aggregate report, and that will be available next week, that summarise these reports across your schools. So if we could move on a slide. The structure of these new reports is fairly similar to the ones that compared your school with the national average, but there are a couple of changes. The first big difference is that we've identified 20 schools that are similar to yours, and we've used those as the comparison point rather than the national average or the local authority average. And I'll explain what I mean by similar a little bit later on. Now, for a headline, you can see how you rank amongst those 20 schools for overall attendance and persistent absence. And we break that down by free school meals and SEND status of your pupils. In particular, your similar schools will have a similar proportion of these characteristics to your school. They have a similar proportion of pupils on free school meals and with SEN. This will help you judge how high your attendance is relative to other schools in a similar situation to yours, rather than the national average, which includes a whole range of schools, some of which may have very different situations to yours. A school might be below the national average, but performing better than nearly all of its similar schools and having higher attendance, or it may be above the national average, but still has lower attendance than most of its similar schools. So after this headline section, there's another new section, and one that we hope you'll find particularly helpful. We've compared many different aspects of attendance between your school and your similar schools, and highlighted up to 3 areas where you're doing relatively well, and up to 3 areas where some of your similar schools have managed to achieve higher attendance than you did. We show you a week-by-week comparison, just as we did in previous reports, only now we show your similar schools median rather than the weekly national average week by week. And lastly, the report contains a year-on-year comparison for your school, and an absence banding table. These are exactly the same as they have been in previous releases. Next slide, please. I want to say a little bit about how we chose your similar schools. We've used a combination of machine learning, AI, and expert judgment in consultation with the sector about what's most important, both in understanding and predicting pupils' attendance from a statistical point of view, but also what influences how schools respond and implement their attendance strategy. As you'd expect, the proportion of free school meals and special educational needs feature here. They're both very important. And we take particular care to match the proportion of pupils with social, emotional, and mental health needs, as that matters a lot for attendance. This means that your similar schools will have similar levels of these characteristics to your own school. We also use a deprivation index in Archie, the Income Deprivation Affecting Children Index. We use that as an additional piece of context. Location matters, so we use your school's region and a measure of how urban or rural its location is. This doesn't mean that your similar schools will all be in the same region as yours, but for most schools, most of your 20 will be in the same region. And if your school is quite unusual for its region, we have the flexibility to match you with schools that are more like yours, but from further afield. The funding rate per pupil doesn't predict pupil attendance directly, but schools with different funding rates will have different options available to them. So we take that into account. And similarly, if a large proportion of your pupils, and therefore probably their parents, have English as an additional language, you may need to approach your attendance interventions differently, and we take account of that as well. Currently, the report doesn't tell you the names of your similar schools, and that's because we aren't allowed to share which schools have higher attendance than you because of confidentiality that surrounds the data collection. So if you wanted to reach out to a school that had higher attendance than yours, we wouldn't be able to tell you which of your similar schools to contact. But we are interested in any feedback you have for us in this area. Next slide, please. In terms of how you can use the report, you have the areas of relative strength and areas to focus on. We've selected the areas to focus on based on where the biggest overall gaps are between your own attendance and that of similar schools. We've cut the data a lot of different ways, so you might see year groups, you might see pupil groups like free school meals, but also things like days of the week in the section. So it's entirely possible that your 3 areas to focus on might be your year 10s, your pupils eligible for free school meals, and your attendance on Mondays. If you weren't sure which groups or aspects of attendance to focus on, we hope this will help you to choose areas where your efforts are more likely to succeed. Conversely, if you were targeting areas where you already have higher attendance than your peers, then we just encourage you to think about whether you can improve things further or whether it might be more productive to focus your efforts on other areas. As with previous reports, we signpost you to how you can explore particular areas in more detail using other tools and your education data. Thanks very much. Now, Blanche is going to summarize the next session.
Thank you, James. So now we're going to look at the releases that we've got coming up and updates to some of the tools. So by September, we're aiming to deliver several updates for local authorities. First of all, we're looking at automated reports on pupils in scope for an attendance return, and this will help reduce the admin burden on schools. Second of all, we plan to introduce a session level code breakdown, enabling LAs to conduct a more bespoke analysis of the drivers of absence. Third, we're developing a weekly download for LAs that will identify pupils who have been removed from school roll and haven't reappeared on another role elsewhere in the country. And finally, we're going to be adding a postcode functionality to LA reports, and this will allow local authorities to view attendance outcomes for pupils who live in their area but attend school elsewhere. Looking a little bit further ahead, we're also working on a new tool for schools called Clean Up Your Data service, and this will help schools identify where data might be incorrect or non-compliant. As always, we'll get in touch with you by email to let you know when these updates are made available. Next slide, please. And finally, I'm just going to wrap up by going over some of the key takeaways from today's session. So first of all, for secondary schools, please, if you haven't already, download your Y6 transition data on the Monitor Your School Attendance tool. This resource will help you to identify pupils with concerning absence rates who may need support. It will help you to work with feeder schools, local authorities and families before the new academic year starts, and also offer tailored interventions for individual children. We also encourage trusts, local authorities, mainstream secondary schools, primary schools to download your attendance summary reports and your similar schools reports. And just a reminder that they will be made available at some point today, possibly even have gone live now, to mainstream secondary and primary schools, and they'll be available from the 17th of June to trusts and local authorities. Again, we will send out communications when they have gone live. I also just wanted to flag that on Thursday the 19th of June from 4 till 4:45 we're holding a special access webinar. We understand that some people have had some issues accessing our tools, so we're going to walk through it step by step. So anyone who has had issues, please come along to that session and we'll answer any questions. If you can't come along, we'll also be recording it and we'll upload it to YouTube. So if you register, then you'll get that recording. And finally, before we finish, just another plea: if you can complete the survey. This is the last of the sessions for this academic year, so we'd love to take forward any ideas or feedback that you have on these sessions for September. And thank you so much for joining. We'll see you next year.